Good morning. Congratulations, you made it on time, and I'm thankful for that. We'll get right into this. You know, I noticed on the website, Randy, when you described this program, you said you were going to be talking about solutions to help deepen our impact on the world. This is not just about thinking, why is Christianity true? And, oh, that's important, okay? But it goes beyond that to how does it affect the world? And I want to talk about that a little bit this morning. How worldview shapes culture. Last night we talked about what is a worldview, and today we want to just get into how does it shape culture. Now, remember this from last night, that your worldview, and by the way, your worldview is your concept or your view of 5 key things. Number 1 is what? God. All worldviews have a view of God, even atheist worldviews. They think he doesn't exist, but that's still a view of God. Secondly, creation. What's really real? You know, is it just matter or are there other things? And the third one, humanity. Who are we? You know, what are we doing here? And these issues, how do we know it's real? That has to do with humanity. Fourthly, moral order. And fifthly, purpose. God, creation, humanity, moral order, and purpose. And those answers to those questions will largely influence or form your sense of what's really important. And there's one word for that, it's called values. So your worldview influences your values, and it doesn't stop there because your values influence your what? Behavior. Right. Your significant behaviors don't come out of a vacuum. You have to make a choice about something. Usually you fall back on what you think is important. But there's a fourth circle. Do you remember what the fourth one is? Culture. So it goes like this. Your worldview influences your values, which influence your behavior, which influence culture or creates culture. I showed this once to a guy and he said to me, doesn't it work the other way around? Isn't it the culture that influences our behavior and therefore forms our values and shapes our worldview? And I thought about that, and I thought, yeah, you know, that's the way it usually goes, unfortunately. Your worldview is kind of shaped by default unless you're actively seeking to shape it by design through attending conferences like this and reading your Bible. But most people, their worldview is subconscious. They don't think about it. They don't write it down. They don't think, oh, this is what I believe about God, creation, humanity, moral, and purpose. They're not that objective about it and deliberate about it. Now, you are. Most people aren't. I mean, you're just this tiny, tiny piece of the culture that actually wants to think about this. And so for most people, it's the culture that shapes our behavior and values and our worldview. But you're here because we want to reverse the process. So we want to start with what is our biblical view of reality, and how can that shape my values and influence my behavior so that I can actually have an effect in making culture here in Tacoma or wherever you're at. So there's a great verse in Romans 12:2. I'm sure you've heard it many times. Do not be conformed to this world system. And the Phillips translation says, don't let the world around you squeeze you into its mold. I like that. But, Paul says, be transformed by, get this, the renewing of your what? Mind. The mind's a pretty important thing. And Philip says, let God remold your minds from within. That is what we're hoping is happening today in this conference. That your mind is, God is going to use the word spoken by these speakers here to tweak some things, you know, and to remold your mind from within. My mind is still being remolded. It never stops. I mean, you know, it's not like a one-time deal. You don't go to one conference and, oh, everything's changed. But so that you may prove or discern what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. That's the goal, not just to have your mind transformed. I mean, that's necessary, but that's just one step in a process here. The ultimate goal is that you will be actually discerning what is that good and acceptable will of God and actually doing it. So that's where we're coming from here. Now, last night we talked about trees, and we saw how that some people don't see trees like other people do. An animal sees trees differently than a Christian sees trees. A Christian sees trees differently than a naturalist sees trees or a humanist sees trees. And if we had time, we could unpeel that a little bit. But today we want to say that some people see peanuts differently. And not everybody sees the peanut alike. The Christian actually sees the peanut differently than the atheist. And if we had time again, we could unpeel this and walk through it. But I want to give you an example of this. The person who I'm thinking of is George Washington Carver, who actually was a dedicated, strong believer in Christ, who saw the world from a Christian perspective, a biblical perspective, and that shaped his values, which influenced his behavior, even his behavior toward peanuts, and he shaped culture as a result. I'm going to show you a little 5-minute video clip. I hope the sound is working on this, and this will kick us off here. Sound? Hello, testing 1 2. Any sound up there? Oh, it looks like it's frozen.
Moses Carver, their current owner, sent someone after them with a good rate.
Let's go back here. Okay, I think we're ready. Yeah, there we go.
George Washington Carver was born at about 1865, the son of slaves. His father was killed in a log hauling accident a few weeks after George was born. While still an infant, he was kidnapped, along with his mother and sister, by thieves wanting to make some money by selling them to another slave owner. Moses Carver, their current owner, sent someone after them with a good racehorse to buy them back. The kidnappers took the horse and left George lying on the ground, sick with whooping cough. His mother and sister were never heard from again. Carver's relationship with the Lord began early in life. He wrote, "I was just a mere boy when converted, hardly 10 years old. There isn't much of a story to it. God just came into my heart one afternoon while I was alone in the loft of our big barn, while I was shelling corn to carry to the mill to be ground to meal." Carver had a passion for learning. That passion led him to earn a degree in agriculture from Iowa State College as the first African-American student there. In Carver's day, the South was a one-crop economy, cotton. It was the only crop banks would lend money to farmers for planting. But the soil became depleted through repeated planting of cotton year after year. Carver knew that if the farmers planted legumes, like peanuts and sweet potatoes, it would revive the soil. The only problem was, in those days, there was no market for peanuts and sweet potatoes. So Carver set out to create a market and invented 300 uses of the peanut and 118 uses of the sweet potato in his lab at Alabama's Tuskegee Institute. Booker T. Washington was the head of Tuskegee at the time. He invited Carver to come to his school when Carver was 31 years old. In his invitation, Washington wrote, "Our students are poor, often starving. We teach them to read and write, but words cannot fill stomachs. They need to learn how to plant and harvest crops. I cannot offer you money, position, or fame. These things I now ask you to give up. I offer you in their place work, hard work, the challenge of bringing people from degradation, poverty, and waste to full manhood." Carver's response was, "I shall be glad to cooperate with you in doing all that I can through Christ who strengtheneth me to better the condition of our people." And Carver did just that. He said, "I took just a handful of peanuts and looked at them. 'Great Creator,' I said, 'why did you make the peanut? Why?' God answered his prayer. He said, 'The great Creator taught me to take the peanut apart and put it together again. And out of the process have come forth all these products.' He called his lab God's Little Workshop. Included among the many products from the peanut, the sweet potato, and soybean are instant coffee, chili sauce, mayonnaise, molasses, meat tenderizer, shaving cream, wood stain, printer's ink, adhesives, axle grease, bleach, linoleum, and fuel briquettes. Carver gave God the credit. He said, "No books ever go into my laboratory. I never have to grope for methods. The method is revealed the moment I am inspired to create something new. Without God to draw aside the curtain, I would be helpless." Dr. Carver locked the door to his lab when he was creating things. He said, "Only alone can I draw close enough to God to discover His secrets." In 1921, when speaking before the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee in Washington, D.C., he was asked, "Dr. Carver, how did you learn all of these things?" Carver answered, "From an old book." "What book?" asked the chairman. Carver replied, "The Bible." The chairman inquired, "Does the Bible tell about peanuts?" "No, sir," Dr. Carver replied, "but it tells about the God who made the peanut. I asked him to show me what to do with a peanut, and he did."
Okay, I showed this clip to a group of businessmen in Bellevue once, and afterwards one of the guys there said, "I attended Iowa State University. They're very proud of Carver there. They have a big display about Carver." And he said to the group, he said, "You know, this is the first time I realized Carver had any faith at all, because the display completely left that out. And you can't understand this man until you understand his faith." And that's what you call the secularization of education, right there. Okay, but anyway, that's another lecture here.
George Washington.
Here's what George Washington Carver said, and these are from books that talk about his personal life. He said, "All of my life I've risen regularly at 4 o'clock, that's a.m., and I've gone into the woods and talked with God. There He gives me my orders for the day." He said, "The secret of my success, it's simple. It's found in the Bible. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths." That is basic. He said to his friend Jim Hardwick, man who needed a purpose, a mission to keep him alive, had one. He could be, get this, God's co-worker. My purpose alone must be God's purpose. As I worked on projects which fulfilled a real human need, forces were working through me which amazed me. I would often go to sleep with an apparently insoluble problem, and when I awoke, the answer was there. Clarence Mason, the director of the Carver Research Foundation, said of Carver more than 20 years after his death, he said this, "I have the greatest respect for, profound respect and admiration for Dr. Carver." Why? Because he turned away from the field in which he was most skilled and best trained, which was botany, to work in an area which he felt he could do the most good for the people in his community, which was chemistry. And in a letter to a pastor, he said this, "Pray for me, please, that everything said and done will be to His glory, God's glory. I am not interested in science or anything else that leaves God out of it." Humans, he said, are the highest embodiment of God's handiwork. We heard that last night. That's what gives us value. We're created in God's likeness and image. And they are to be loved most. He didn't love peanuts more than people. He said, living for others is what the Christ life is all about. I know my Redeemer lives. Thank God, I love humanity. Complexion, that skin color, doesn't interest me one bit. Here's the guy, son of slaves. Okay. Now, he had a biblical view of reality. He had a biblical view of God, creation, humanity, moral order, and purpose. Where did he get that view? He read the Bible. And at Tuskegee, even after he on Sunday nights, he would have a Bible study. He'd invite any students to come to his, study the Bible together. And he kept that Bible study going after he retired. And as a result of that view of reality, that biblical understanding of what's really real, He had certain values. Certain things were important to him. And because of those values, it shaped what he did in his lab and elsewhere. His behavior was influenced by those biblically shaped values. And as a result, he actually shaped and made culture and created culture. Okay, not only did he affect the culture of Tuskegee at the time, but he went to the North to meet with Ford about using plastics in his cars. And he actually helped take the South, which had a broken economy based on cotton, which they had grown for so many years, as you heard, that it depleted the soil. He said, look, we can restore this soil. Here's how. Plant legumes. Well, guess what? There's no market for it. Peanuts. Who buys peanuts? You know, you sell them at the circus. But he said, look, let's create new things out of these things. Let's make plastics out of soybeans. And let's get Ford to use them in his car. You see where he's coming from? He had this mind that didn't say, okay, here's the answer right here. He looked beyond that. And God gave him ideas by his own testimony. He only owned 3 patents out of his hundreds of inventions because he said he didn't think it was right for him to take money for something God had given him. I wouldn't have gone that far. I mean, really, but he did. Okay, that's the way he was. He had a Christian mind. Okay, now I'm going to give you a tool so you too can be intentional. I know that you have a Christian mind or you wouldn't be here, most of you. Well, actually, I hope there are some non-Christians here. That's what I hope. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but we're here to renew our minds. And this little tool will help all of us, no matter how mature we are, to do that. It's called the Daddy Plan. And on the website, Randy, wherever you are, you also said this, or whoever put this together, that here we are. Thank you for passing those out. Yeah, if we could pass those handouts out. Well, listen to this. What we're going to do here is find out or focus on what's possible. I like that. What is possible? If Christians are informed, that takes teaching, and given new skills, tools, I underline tools, here's a tool, and ideas on how you can play a central role in your communities, Tacoma, wherever. Guess this, doing God's work. Now, did you catch what Carver said? He said, by creating these things, I'm doing God's work. I'm co-working with God. You and I do God's work too. We are not innovators with plants. Some of us are plumbers. Some of us are teachers. Some of us are homemakers. Some of us are students. That's our work. God's work in defending and renewing all things in Christ. So we're passing this tool out. It's called the Daddy Plan. You've got it in your hand. And what I would like to ask you to do is spend 30 to 45 minutes sometime in the next 3 days before you forget all this. Get some quiet time alone. I'm going to tell you how to fill this out. Now, I only have one request, that you don't fill it out right now. Because this is the problem of doing this, because you're going to be wanting to think about this while I'm talking. But I really would like you to focus on the overhead here. It goes like this. With respect to blank, now here's where you're going to have to fill in the blank with your specific focus, whatever your hands have to do. Now, if you're a plumber, you can say, with respect to my work as a plumber, okay, what can I daddy? Now, it's an acronym for discover, apply, develop, and implement. We're going to unpeel this one at a time. Discover, apply, develop, implement in connection with God. In other words, you got to think here. What in the world does your job as a plumber have to do with the biblical view of God? Is there any connection whatsoever there? That's what you need to think through, and you need to pray. Lord, show me what is the connection between you, your character, your nature, your plan, and plumbing. Pray about it. Think about it. I'm going to give you some tools that will help you. Then you got to think, well, how does plumbing connect with the biblical view of creation, of what's really real? Think about that. How about this? What does plumbing have to do with the biblical view of humanity? What does it have to do with the biblical view of moral order or the biblical view of purpose? You know, unpeel those things quietly before the Lord. You know, say, Lord, show me. How does this fit with the biblical view of reality? Or you could say, with respect to my work as a homemaker, which is the hardest job on the planet. And when I say work, I'm just not talking about work for pay. I don't know any homemaker that's ever been paid for homemaking in terms of dollars. Yeah. Maybe there's somebody out there, but I doubt it. You know, how do you put a fee on that? And there's also people that work for no pay who are students. You know, if you're a student, you're working. And I tell the teachers, you know, when the kids get on the school bus, they go to school, or even if they homeschooled and they're going to in front of that computer to do a distance learning course, they're working. They're not getting paid, they're working. Learning how to spell is work, hard work. Learning how to read, learning how to write essays, learning about chemistry and calculus, hard work. Even the scripture tells us much reading is weariness of the flesh. You don't get paid a nickel for it, but you're working hard. I have a passion for restoring the biblical theology of work. We could do a whole conference, believe it or not, on the biblical theology of work. We're just celebrating the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, and Martin Luther got theology of work going again. It's in the New Testament, but it got buried, and he got it going when he said that the milkmaid that milks the cow to the glory of God by faith is doing just as much the work of God as the monk in the monastery. The radical stuff, okay? And guess what? We remember Luther for the doctrine of sola scriptura, only scripture only, saved by grace, by faith, not by works. The priesthood of all believers. Those are essential doctrines of Scripture that Luther helped to revive and got the Reformation. But there's one doctrine that I rarely hear spoken about, and that's Luther's doctrine of vocation. And that changed history, actually changed the course of history through the Moravians and the Puritans took that doctrine of vocation and they applied it. And that actually affected this country greatly. And today we hear very little about it. But we could do a whole workshop on that. That's another one. How about your work as a student or your work as an innovator with plants? Now, I don't think we have too many innovators with plants here. So here's how it works with Carver. Now, I imagine myself, okay, if I was Carver and I was asked to do this, how would it look? Well, here's how I think it might look. First of all, what did Carver discover about God that related to his work? Well, here's one thing I know he discovered. I believe that God communicates with human beings about specific things, and he can give me understanding and wisdom about creating new things from plants, if I'm listening. That was a faith position. The role of God he saw in his life was to talk to him about how to create these things. He discovered that. I don't know where, I don't know how, but it became a belief. And he would write that down on this form as a belief commitment. Now, the apply section. It's one thing to believe it, but how do you apply it? That means, how does this belief relate to my work as an innovator with plants? Well, here's one way. I could ask God why he made the peanut, and he could show me how to create new products from plants. Duh. I could actually do that. If he's really there, if he really speaks, I can actually create new things that he shows me to create. That's the visionary part here. The I could. But that's not enough. He has to figure out the development part. What do I need to do? Is there some training I need to have? Is there some discipline I need to have in order for this to happen? And he realized, yes, I must make prayer a part of my daily life, as well as the regular part of my work with plants in the lab. And I must take time to listen to the Lord of all plants. He also had to take time to study chemistry. Okay, that's the price he had to pay for doing what he did. And the last step is the action plan. If you don't do your action plan, it's no good. It's just a piece of paper. You got to figure out, what am I going to do? What are my steps of implementation? Okay, I will rise at 4 a.m., talk with God, get my orders for the day. I'll ask the great creator why he made the peanut, and I will lock the door to my lab so I can hear his secrets. So it's simple. I believe, therefore I could, and I must, and I will. I believe, I could, I must, I will. Let me give you another example. How did he think about creation? He discovered, by reading the Bible, something. He said, I believe that after plants were created, humans were commissioned to rule over them. He saw that in Genesis 1 as co-workers with God. He believed that, and because he did, he realized that he could rule over the peanut. He could rule over the peanut and the sweet potato and the soybean by co-working with God to create new products from plants. He could do that. It was vision, realization. Okay, but he also realized, in order to do that, I must change my primary focus from botany to chemistry in order to rule over peanuts, sweet potatoes, and soybeans in the lab. Therefore, I will, here's his action plan, I'll spend time with God in the little workshop, using my knowledge of botany and chemistry, taking apart plants and putting them together again as he shows me how to create new things. That was an action plan. He actually did it. He got up, he went to his lab, he locked the door, he prayed, he did it. How did he think about humanity? This is another one. He came to realize and to believe that humans were the highest embodiment of God's handiwork and are to be loved most. He actually believed that, and because he did, he realized I could demonstrate my love for the farmers by teaching them about effective crop rotation. And I could create products from these crops to generate new markets. But there's something I have to do. I have to develop a practical way of educating farmers about crop rotation and create new products from plants. Therefore, his action plan was, okay, I will create a school on wheels to teach farmers. And guess what? He did that. He had a school on wheels. He created it. He took it out to where the farmers were, and he talked with them about how to rotate crops and why. Farm to farm to farm. Okay, school on wheels, he called it. I will create industrial uses for the peanut, sweet potato, and soybean and encourage new markets for farmers. That was his action plan, all based on his view of humanity. And moral order, well, he believed that humans have a responsibility to manage God's creation in ways that are resourceful and beneficial without waste or abuse. He was a big stickler on not being wasteful. And if that was true, and he really did believe it, he could find uses for renewable resources of the peanut, sweet potato, and the soybean by benefiting people and industry, yet being kind to the land at the same time. He felt he had a moral responsibility before the Lord not to be wasteful or abusive. And he lived it out. He said, well, I must do all I can to encourage applied research in crop rotation and creating new products from plants and encouraging the use of such crops in industry. Therefore, he said, I will establish a center for the development of renewable resource. And he did that in Tuskegee. I think it's still there, actually. He developed the center. He created it. And he said, I'll also develop relationships with leaders in industry, such as Henry Ford, to encourage, blah, blah, blah. So he had an implement plan, and he was creating culture. Lastly, his view of purpose. I believe living for others is what Christ's life is all about. That's a purpose statement. Therefore, I could use my skills as a botanist and as a chemist to produce beneficial products that will serve farmers and better their lives. Therefore, I must work hard to combine my knowledge of botany and chemistry with my trust in God to create industrial products from plants that will help the farmers, and also I must help find new markets. Therefore, I will create new products from plants. I will establish a center for research at Tuskegee Institute that will continue long after I'm gone. Bingo. Now, I created this daddy plan based on what I've read about his life. Okay, I don't know that he would have done it exactly like that. And I'm not asking you, I'm not even suggesting that you do this plan for all 5 areas. I'm suggesting you just think of one area first and think about how does plumbing relate to my biblical view of humanity, and think through all the ramifications of that and figure out, what do you really believe about the relationship between plumbing and the biblical view of humanity? Can you be intentional about this? Can you be that specific? Can you write it down on a piece of paper? Try it. And then figure out, well, if this is true and I could do this, is there something I need to do here? Is there some training I need to take? There's a few books I need to read, talk to somebody about how to do this, and then figure out your action plan. Okay. So he saw Peanuts in the light of a biblical frame of reference. And because he did, we've all been recipients of his work in a positive way, but especially the South. Now, here's what the daddy plan looks like. So the first thing you need to do is to figure out what is your vision, your challenge, or your opportunity, or your project. And if I were Carver, I would have said, well, I want to bring about positive economic opportunities for Southern farmers. That's why he was invited to come to Tuskegee. That's what he said he would do by God's grace, through Christ who strengthens me, blah, blah, blah. That was his mission. Okay, you got to figure out, what is your mission? Okay, if you're a plumber, what is your mission statement? Or what is the challenge you have before you that you want to fulfill? Think about that. Now, I'm going to just tell you that there are resources free, no charge, on our website. I want to tell you how to get there. biblicalworldview.com. biblicalworldview.com. If you go to that website, and then if you go to the section that says resources, there it is, resources. Click that, you'll go to another page. You scroll down a little bit, and you'll see tools for teachers and parents. Well, you don't need to be a teacher and a parent to use these tools. And some of the tools have to do with the daddy plan, and there is actually the daddy plan, as I think Carver would have filled it out, is there. You can download it as a sample. And also questions that you can ask yourself to contextualize your work, no matter what work you're doing. Okay, they're all there. I urge you, I plead with you to avail yourself of these benefits. When this conference is over, within the next 3 days, go to the site, pull out the samples, look at them, read them, think about them. It may take you a lot more than 45 minutes. It might take you 45 days, okay, but that's better than nothing, okay? Take a look at that. Here's a sample I really like here. It's on the website. To ask yourself, concerning God, is God active and alive in this project? In my plumbing? If so, how? Now I want to end with another sample of how one person can integrate his faith with his work. This is Jack Van Hartesveld, lives in Seattle, works in Seattle. I interviewed him in his office. It was the 21st floor of some skyscraper downtown. Had to get through security to get there because he deals with tons of money, okay? And he sells hotels for an investment firm, okay? And just listen to how he did this, and that'll wrap it up. And then we'll have questions, okay?
Well, when I first started out in this business, it was the trick was to figure out a way to do it well, and the amount of money that's being at issue is, in the beginning it was $5 to $10 million. Now it's several hundred million per transaction. So anytime you have a situation where that much money is involved, just the roundings could be millions. And people fight very hard in order to protect their interests. What happens in the beginning, I think, is that they try to figure out a way to be smarter than you. And they try to outsmart you, figure that there's something that that maybe you don't know that they know, and they can trick you into agreeing to something that deprives you of your rightful gain from the transaction, whatever position you happen to be in at the time. And so in the beginning, in the early 80s when I was doing this, that seemed to me to be what the game was. And so I tried to just be good at that game. And I found out that I had an aptitude for this, and that after you do a few dozen of these transactions, it's a little bit harder to trick you. But come to find out, you could actually trick them. And I got to the point where I just didn't want to play that game anymore. What I really wanted to do is to tell people what I really wanted. And I thought that everybody that was involved in the transaction had some right to receive either a job or compensation or a commission or a contract to build something or whatever it is that they were bargaining for. If they were at the table in the first place, they hadn't disqualified themselves in some other way, that they ought to be able to get what they bargained for. I went to my employer. I actually went to my lawyers first after having done many transactions with this same group of lawyers. And I told them that I didn't want to play this game anymore. I wanted to just tell them what I really thought I deserved out of this transaction, and I recognized what they ought to get out of it, and that I was going to actually help them to protect their interests. Well, the lawyers became very upset about this and said that they would not represent me, that I worked for a public company at that time, and that I needed to go to the board of directors and tell them what I was going to do and get their permission. And if I didn't do that, then they weren't actually going to help me do this, or even allow me to do it. So I did that. I went to the board, and I asked them. I told them what I wanted to do, and said I just wanted to play this completely straight, be honest on each of the points, and I wanted to put together fair documents that were fair for everybody. And they gave me permission to do it. And the first project that I did like that was in New Orleans. And this was in 1992. And there was a real estate kind of a collapse had gone on throughout the United States. The RTC had been formed, and the two people that I was dealing with to build this hotel were struggling financially. Had gone through some threatened foreclosures and problems with their banks, problems with their partners, problems with some of their management companies, and they had developed a lot of kind of sharp edges. And in I walk at that point, having just met with my board. And so I said to them, here's the way we're going to do this. We already had sort of a letter of intent fleshed out. We're going to put together these documents. But here's the way it's going to go. I'm going to look out for you. And I want you to look out for me. Because I think you have a legitimate economic interest here. And there may be ways in which you could be deprived of those interests. But I'm not going to let that happen. Because I think that you deserve what you bargained for. And therefore, I'm going to help you. And I hope before it's all over that you help me to protect my interests. And I'll go first. And we started going through the agreements, and I went to a provision fairly early on, and I said, this is what this says, and it looks great because you're going to be the developer and you're supposed to make this money. And but if you flip in the back, this section here in the back, it looks like actually without doing something really bad, you could be deprived of that. I could do that. Now, I wouldn't deprive you of it, but legally I could. And maybe I'm not here at the time in which this gets triggered. And somebody could take this money away from you. And so what I'd like my lawyer to do, and I looked over at my lawyer, and I said, I would like that provision to be changed so that this unfair thing could not happen to them. And my lawyer was a little uncomfortable, but he didn't want to say anything. And he said, okay, fine, let's do that. And the guys at the other side of the table, they didn't really know what to make of this. But they said, great, thank you. And we moved on. And about a half hour later, we came across another one, and they were ready to turn the page. And I says, before we turn the page, if you look here in the middle, this provision here, that ties over to this other agreement over here, and which has a mere provision. But actually, if you don't do this exactly right, exactly perfectly, you won't get this other compensation that would come to you under certain circumstances. And I don't think that that's fair, because you would trigger this just too easily. It's not right. And I want to change it so that it is fair. Well, that started to really get to him. And as we went on over the period of the next several days going through these agreements, I kept doing that whenever I could. And when things would come up that really hadn't been resolved, we debated them, and I would say, well, this is what would be fair for me. Now, what would be fair for you? And as we kind of articulated it, I took their position and also my own. And we just kind of looked at it from a 360-degree view and what would be the right thing for all of us in this situation. Well, it blew them away. We were able to conclude the transaction, and everybody felt great about it. We built the hotel, and for $25 million, they brought it in on time and on budget, which was great. 2 years later, we sold it for $45 million. We made a $20 million profit, and they got half. And that transaction saved them financially. They also told me later that it changed the way they did business. One of the two of them, I thought, really kind of got it as we were going through it, and one of them I didn't think did. Well, some years later, we decided to do another project together, same two guys. And one of the fellows there, the one that I thought probably didn't get what I was doing, he was being honored that day as being Orlean of the Year. And finally, it was his turn to say thank you or whatever. And he stood up to the microphone that was in front of him, and he turned to the audience, the people who were there, and he pointed to me, and he said, "Jack, would you please come and sit next to me?" So I didn't really want to do that. This was not about me. This was not my moment. This was his moment. But for some reason, he wanted me to do it, and so I did. I walked up and I sat next to him. And he looked at the people and he said, "Thank you very much for all your kind words." He said, "But I am not the one that you should be honoring here today. You should be honoring this man sitting next to me." And he pointed to me. And he went on to say some of the nicest things that anybody has ever said to me. I can't repeat it, but he thanked me. He thanked me. They were saying, "It's you, sir," him. And when it's his turn to talk, he said, "It's not me, it's him." And he referenced specifically the things that I had done and the way it had affected him. Sometimes people don't get what you're doing right away. But it's not always about right now. Sometimes it takes people a while to get it. And the hard part is to not fall prey to that. Don't make your ethics become situational, where he's a bad guy, therefore I have the right to be a bad person. Don't do that. What you do is you have your own ethics, your own moral compass, and you just stay with that. You are looking out for their legitimate business interests. And that doesn't mean that you're Santa Claus and that you don't make money, because we do. I mean, we do very well here. But what happens is that we're not mired down in litigation. We're not struggling through fractured relationships. We are able to resolve things with phone calls. I don't have to call my lawyer to straighten things out. People kind of get it, and they will generally reflect back to you what you are showing to them.
Was there something that happened in your life where you decided you didn't want to do it the normal way and you wanted to do it this other way? What caused this to happen?
Well, when I was a teenager, I thought that I would go into the ministry, become a pastor of a church. That was kind of my path. And then my father died when I was a teenager. And that sort of changed things. I thought I had to make money, which I did, to support myself and my family. my mother, my sister. Um, and I put myself through school by working. And all of those ethics and morals were still there. They're still ingrained within me. And as I began to develop in my career, I found myself not always following those morals and ethics. And it bothered me. It always bothered me. It got to the point where I just didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to bring what we were talking about and listening to on Sunday morning, I wanted to bring to Monday morning and Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning. I wanted to live more of my life in that ethical structure, that spiritual understanding. And, you know, the interesting thing is, though, is that there is no penalty that you pay. It's better. You do better. You don't do worse. That's the joke of it. There's no penalty. It's easier. You actually make more money. Your business booms. I mean, I don't know why I don't know why everybody doesn't do this. What happened? It's human nature to be maybe a little bit manipulative and trying to outsmart the other guy. Your ego gets involved and you don't want to look like an idiot and all this kind of stuff. And it forces you into behavior and it's reinforced by everybody else's behavior. But man, as soon as you stop doing that and you just go out and do the right thing, it works.
So he discovered and believed Matthew 7:12. In everything, do to others what you'd have them do to you. This sums up the law and the prophets. He said, well, I could treat those I'm negotiating with in the way I'd like them to treat me. Duh. By working hard for their interests as well as my own. However, to do that, I must let the company and lawyers know what I'm going to do, and etc. And I must go up to my board and gain clearance. And then his action plan was to deal with people on the other side of the table in a manner that was fair and just. But it's all rooted in a biblical view of reality. I started 10 minutes late, so I get 10 minutes more. We have 10 minutes of questions. Is that okay? 10 minutes of questions, comments, or answers. Yes? Yeah. Yeah. How do you get them to see the bigger picture is what you're asking. I have a tool for children. It's called the Awesome Activator. And I have a sample here on the website of dishwashing. How do you put washing dishes into the context of the bigger picture? It's a mind map. It's a mind map. And if you go to the website and say, Awesome Activator is a tool, and then I have the dishwashing sample there. And that's the tool I suggest for children. I don't recommend this for children. This form, this is for adults. There's a kids form called the Awesome Activator, and it works better for them. It's the same principle, but different form. Next. Well, that's going to cut our 10 minutes short so I can quit on time. I just want to tell you, before I go, someone asked me at the table, where do I get this stuff? All the videos I'm showing, all the stuff I'm telling you about today is in an ebook that comes with a participant guide. This is a shameless plug. I hope it's okay. And it's on our website. It's the God's Pleasure at Work curriculum pack. And the ebook has all the video clips, everything you need for working with your kids. We use it as a high school text. We're trying to get it into Christian schools, but it's all there. It's $35, one night out to dinner, and there you go. So pray for us as we continue to work ahead, and I'll turn it back to Randy here.